behind. When all the world seems in tune, and love goes on softly on. So don't be sighing or crying, dearest winter
So, welcome to another Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast. I'm Scott Eric Kaufman. This is Steve Attewell. I am broadcasting for the last time from my lovely abode in Irvine, California, which accounts for the lovely decor. Shut up. And today we're going to be talking about the exquisitely titled Lord Snow, because very rarely do you have the title of an episode that is an out-and-out insult to probably the most sympathetic character in the episode. Yeah, I mean, you know where it's going right from the get-go. Steve and I have both written extensively on the chapters that this is based on, and me, the episode itself. So we will be referencing a number of posts that we've already written. We will include links to those on the final post. And I guess the last thing is that my head is entirely clogged up, and I can barely hear out of one ear, so I apologize in advance if Steven says something brilliant and I say, huh. Please repeat yourself. I hope you'll indulge me wanting to hear what it is he says as much as you do. All right, so where do you want to get started?
Well, I mean, I think there's sort of two ways we could kind of deal with some of the ancillary stuff. I mean, we already basically did Daenerys in our last podcast. I mean, the main thing to say here is that, you know, in this episode she confronts Viserys. I think this is the episode where she slaps him across the face with a belt, right?
Yeah, this is actually... that's a scene that we should talk about because I think it's a crucial scene in terms of naming. It's the one where it begins with that establishing shot of them walking through the Dothraki Sea, and then we zoom in on her and her wise old mentor, right? And we get this series of what begin as two shots, so the two of them in a shot together as he's giving, doling out advice to her about how to be, a Dothraki and a Khaleesi. And then as the scene progresses, they go from these two shots, which makes them seem together, to a series of one shots, which seem to isolate her.
Right.
And it's at the point of the final one shot that she sees the slave being whipped.
Right, I just saw that.
And she stops, and that's when she says, "I am the Khaleesi." Like
not a queen, a Khaleesi.
Khaleesi, yes. And it's one of those crucial moments in any literary work where someone actually takes up the mantle. They own their own name. And it's really this significant moment in her development. She's finally realized who she is, who she belongs, how she belongs in society. And it's a really rousing moment, and you're very excited for her because she's taken the power and then she walks into the fucking wheat.
Yeah, and
she just is like, all right, my turn.
It actually looks more like either bamboo or giant marijuana plants.
But it's a big break from the big dramatic moment.
It's a huge break, and they do the very significant costume change.
Yeah.
Where now she's dressed like a Dothraki, and the Viserys comes charging in and tries to sort of reassert his status, and then gets whipped down, rather brutally. And what you kind of don't get quite so much in the show as in the book, because they've changed things subtly, is that she says in the book this is the moment at which she suddenly sees Viserys for what he is. That, in her mind he had always been this kind of larger, powerful figure, because of course he's her older brother. He's 8 years older than her. And at this point in her life she's 14. And for the first moment she sees him as weak. And she sort of asks herself, why did she ever find him frightening? And the main difference is that in the book, she tells the Dothraki to take his horse. Yeah. And she has the cultural understanding to know what that means.
and to know that she's basically putting him down.
Yeah, that she's making him, a contemptible figure in the eyes of the Khalasar, which is this institution that is constantly observing people for judging their place in the collective.
I agree with that. I mean, in the show, there's a little more ambiguity as to what she's doing, because I've had students write papers about breaking down her final statements, where she says no, no, and then finally, it's like halfway through the sentence, she realizes, oh wait, I just declared myself to be Khaleesi. I should be a little more direct. And I'm forgetting the exact dialogue, and I don't have mine pulled up right now because my copy of Game of Thrones is in a box somewhere. But it's this moment where, okay, what she says is no, no, and that seems to have no reaction. And then she says, and she gets cold. Leave him alone. Right. Right, and it's when she says that.
Yeah, it's when she realizes that she can order these things to happen. I think I'm wrong though. Actually, I think the bit with the belt happens next episode.
Well, it is the next encounter between the two where he enters her tent.
Oh no, I was wrong.
No, I think it is that episode. It is this episode.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find it and failing, because this episode seems to jump around a bit.
It's toward the end.
In terms of going...
I mean, it is toward the... it's towards the end of the episode.
Yeah, enough flicking around. So,
and by the way, just in case if you're watching this and wondering why I've suddenly turned into Kevin Costner from Field of Dreams, it's sort of the inevitable comparison.
Symbolic, yeah.
Yeah, the entry into the place of the heart of the people, be it the corn in Iowa or the wheat / marijuana / bamboo of the Dothraki Sea. There's this sort of ritualistic, we come from here, we enter back into it. And it's kind of, I'm not going to say corny because that would be awful, but it is kind of, as tropes go, a little played out. But it is a really important moment for her nonetheless. And it's juxtaposed in an episode. I think this is, the way that I've sort of framed it, is that we have this moment where Dany realizes who she is and gets to say, I am the Khaleesi, in an episode called Lord Snow, in which Jon learns exactly who he is.
Right.
And has to take up his mantle as...
Yeah. And that's... I think it's a really... For economy of storytelling, it's a really good episode where, Jon Snow... It has a rather, significant arc in this episode, that he starts out being very angry and taking his anger out on everyone around him, and then getting this reality check that, far from being this kind of universally put upon figure, that he is in fact privileged over others, and that, if he wants to kind of repair what he thinks he has been denied him, a place in leadership, a sense of family, that he has to, in the words of Booker T. Washington, cast down his bucket where he is.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I'm just moving to him being petulant, walking back and forth. I am important. He's surrounded by other members of the Night Watch, and he is trying to claim that, and he does that for 8 or 9 shots, but he's definitely trying to claim that initially he's better than them. He has not listened to Tyrion's advice. He is, but what's really interesting is that, shortly after this, we'll have a recapitulation of the opening scene, in that after Jon beats the crap out of everyone, he goes and he starts picking up all their swords.
Right.
Which is bring us right back to, Winter's Coming, to the opening scene of Jon being the good brother. And then, of course, he's jumped by his brothers.
Peers, yeah.
Yes, only to be saved by Tyrion. And I don't think I've ever written the post where I actually explain the way I do in class how that scene works, but it's a very interesting scene because Tyrion is as tall as everyone else throughout 95% of it. He is their equal in height. And they go to great lengths of pushing Tyrion, 15 feet back in order to have Jon's right shoulder, align with Tyrion's left shoulder. And it's a really significant scene because Tyrion is saying, I have power. One word from me.
Right. And you're all dead.
And he's putting his neck out on the line for Jon Snow, which at the moment, besides the sort of getting together over, being dwarves and little people and bastards, it's hard to understand why he would.
Mm. And I think that the interesting thing for me coming back to this scene after what we've seen is that of the three who assault him, Jon turns two of them into his closest friends. Pip and Gren become this, Laurel and Hardy, those two guys pair, and Rast is the traitor.
Yeah. Nowhere near as much as in the novels, though.
Yeah, I mean, he's been merged with a character called Chet, which I think is an even better name for, frat bro douchery. The name Chet just evokes popped collars, but
Well, and just to hammer home that point, I don't know if you've ever seen the film, the Noah Baumbach film, Kicking and Screaming, which stars Eric Stoltz of the many '80s films with popped collars, as a bartender at a sort of quasi-Ivy graduate institution. And one day, Olivia d'Abo comes into his bar, and she's like, "Have you ever said your name so much to yourself that it just doesn't sound like your name anymore?" And the Eric Stoltz character is like, "No, that's never happened to me." And then Olivia d'Abo leaves, and he stands there at the bar alone, and goes, "Chet, Chet, Chet." It's just to hammer home your point. Yeah, Chet is about as fraterno douchebag as you can get.
Yeah. Although
I think outside of Blaine. Sorry, Blaine is more, but Chet is a close second.
I mean, I guess what's interesting about the difference in the show is that in the books there's this kind of interesting class reason for why Chet is such an asshole, which is that Sam took his job.
Yeah.
And he bitterly resents him for that. Whereas in the show, Rast just hates Sam with a passion from second one, and it's clear that for whatever reason, the discipline of the Night's Watch, the sort of the process that's supposed to turn these people into brothers, just never took with him.
And I think that goes for a lot of them, and it's not just, I think, because they're douchebags. Although, whoa, what the? Okay, we're having.
Whoa.
Oh, okay. Yes, right. I'm still there. All right.
That needs
I
to
seem
be
to have disappeared down a rabbit hole. I don't, I don't think we're getting the sort of same in the sorry. To just back up a second from before we went into whatever Twilight Zone we entered. In the series, because of the condensation of characters, we don't get a really kind of good understanding of the sort of internal conflict of the Night's Watch until they leave the Wall. Only then do we start to see the fissures.
And that's one of the things that I write about extensively in my essays about the Jon chapters, which is that you can see from the chapters, from the very first instant you're at Castle Black, that this is an institution in crisis. Yeah. And a big part of that is Alistair Thorne, that here is a guy who is a terrible teacher. He is not good at his job. He basically is a bully and a sadist, and kind of is working out his resentments for... Because the backstory that you get is that he was a knight who fought on the wrong side of the Robert's Rebellion, and he's been exiled at the Wall for 17 years. No, 15 years.
And there's a reason that he's going to be on the wrong side of the rebellion. By the way, I'm Chet now.
Yeah.
Like I said, douchebag. There's a reason that he would take that out on Jon, being on the wrong side of the rebellion against Robert. And that's something that we get sort of in the show, but not really in anywhere near the explanation. It's just sort of like, oh, we realize associated with Robert means associated with Ned, means you're going to get picked on.
In the episode where Ned Stark walks into the throne room and sees Jaime there, almost exactly
where he had left him.
Yeah, where he left him last time. And the other thing, so to get back to why kind of Alliser Thorne is important, is that the only reason that he has his job is that he is a knight, and he's teaching peasants, and that just as Sir Waymar Royce was in charge of this patrol because he was a lordling, class is part of what has kind of sapped the vitality of the Night's Watch, and you can just sort of see it all over the place, and that's why you gain something, but you also lose something in not having the figure of Donal Noye at the Forge. This kind of, working class man of substance who's been able to make himself a presence within the Night's Watch, who's kind of there to remind Jon, what class privilege is.
Don't we see him momentarily?
No, he doesn't exist in the show.
Okay. Well, that's awful.
Well, I mean, I think it's the same way that the showrunners have done everything, which is he doesn't exist in the show up until he absolutely has to exist in the show. And there's no reason why Tyrion can't give that monologue. He is someone who has a prior relationship with Jon Snow, is attuned to inequalities of power because of his own disability, and but I would not be surprised if Donal Noye is cast for season 4.
Okay, normally when you say that, things we don't, so I'm going to take your word for that. But I will say that those moments with Alliser they're strange because he's obviously trying to lord over Jon Snow. He's obviously trying to dominate that screen and to belittle him. But the screen itself...
And to set everyone against him.
Yeah. But the screen itself, as you should now say with the my infamous little lines, the scene itself does not, in fact, allow him... Jon Snow is only half an inch shorter than him because he started to walk forward, and I didn't get the shot in time. But if you look at sort of the dynamics of this image, Jon Snow is being shown to be Alliser's equal. Visually, the other members of the Night's Watch, they are basically, well, they're literally in this shot part of the wall. They're not people, they are scenery, even though they're looking on. Right, with the central element of the screen being that single post, which is, like, I guess, a very important post. And thank God none of us are Freudians, otherwise we'd have something completely different to say about this. But it is significant that Alliser is visually being put in his place almost immediately. Because Jon is going to be more important. I keep on, like, just misremembering where the series ends and where the books, so we'll just say Jon will be more important. But anyway,
sorry, I just caught something that I'm going to bring up in a bit. Let's quickly knock out the Bran stuff, just because I want to spend quite a bit of time on Eddard and Catelyn.
Okay.
So I mean the main thing about the bit with Bran in this is we get that great scene from Old Nan, who unfortunately is no longer with us. She actually died when they were doing post-production on season 1. But a lot of the Bran storyline has kind of been lost because of a decision by the showrunners, which I think is a good one in the end, to not do dream sequences and not do flashbacks. But,
Yeah.
And what we kind of lose from that is the full scope of Bran's connection to the otherworldly. But I like this scene where he's learning the stories about the White Walkers, although what they've kind of stripped out is this meta mythology about what in the North is referred to as the last hero, what the Relorans describe as Azor Ahai, and what the Targaryens used to call the Prince Who Was Promised, that there is supposed to be this Messiah figure who is associated with winter coming and the White Walkers and this apocalyptic struggle. But,
Well, I think the thing to say about it is that this is the second time that the show has offered us an explanation of what the real stakes of all of these machinations are. But again, as with just kind of shuffling it into the first 5 minutes of the prologue, and then turning it into a story told to a child, it diminishes the importance of. I mean, it's as if we were watching, I don't know, a version of Star Wars in which the people of Alderaan were just kind of telling tales about the moon and the day the new moon appeared, and sort of just idly kind of speculating about. And then they were having their own power plays and whatever, and then all of a sudden it blows up. I mean, that's sort of what we're getting here. I just told the saddest story ever, right, of a mother reading to her child about the new moon, the day the new moon came to Alderaan. Oh, it was a beautiful day.
Okay.
Well, I just said that would be a very sad story. Thank you, Sudafed. Anyway, it does diminish the importance of what the actual plot of all of this is, and their decision to avoid, the sort of dream space until Jojen comes along, essentially.
Right.
I think is crucial because you need to build sort of the realism before people will accept the more fantastic elements of the.
Yeah. So, I mean, on to Eddard, because he really is, in some ways, this is very much his episode. The episode starts with his entry into King's Landing, and then moves into the small council scene. It's really where we get the arrival of the political narrative. And just to show you how visual, your visual rhetoric stuff has really, hit me, if you go to 642 in the episode, which you can.
I will, yeah.
You will. It's almost a recapitulation of the Last Supper of Christ, with Ned sitting in the central chair and Littlefinger sitting at far left where Judith should be sitting.
Well,
which is kind of hilarious.
Hard to make that a coincidence.
Yeah, but the thing that I find fascinating, and there's some stuff that we get in this scene that we don't necessarily that we get in the books that we don't get in the scene. One of the kind of open political questions that I've been very interested in is this question about what caused the bankruptcy, because it is sort of a symbol of the spiritual bankruptcy of King's Landing, you could say. But it's also this kind of major, political economy question for the kingdom, that it's one of the few things that Eddard has to deal with as Hand of the King. We don't actually get to see him in his role that much. But, so one of the sort of, I would argue, the surface narratives is that this is all Robert Baratheon being extravagant. He's the reason that the crown is 6 million gold in debt. But I think if you look at comparisons to historical monarchs, it doesn't make sense, because the major expenses of royalty historically at this time were building castles and fighting wars. And Robert hasn't done either of those.
No,
he throws a lot of parties. He gets drunk and he eats a lot, and he likes tournaments. But the evidence isn't there to support 6 million gold in debt. And this is why I have this theory that I'm actually working on an essay for an ebook that basically says Littlefinger embezzled most of the royal treasury.
I can, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying that the kind of extravagances that Baratheon prefers are, we'll call them sort of the minor extravagances of royalty. It's not the Ferrari that puts the Saudi oil baron out of business. It's the billions of dollars.
Yeah.
I can't. And since Robert's main war is fought before he takes office,
right, and he only fights one. I mean, as king, he only fights one limited rebellion in 15 years.
Yeah, and he should be flush.
Exactly, and what I figured out, and you have to piece together the clues, is that Littlefinger is basically running a Ponzi scheme on the monarchy. He is borrowing enormous amounts of money and then diverting it into his own resources. Because here is a man who, he's a very minor lord, right? He doesn't have much income of his own. The Master of the Coin is not a position that comes with a huge salary. I mean, this is not 21st century, postmodern economics.
Department of Treasury, yeah.
Exactly. And yet, you learn in the books that he basically owns half of King's Landing. And that, he, is a major player in commodities speculation. And he's a money lender. And he is able to buy the loyalty of various lords by buying up their debts. And what he's basically done is he's diverted all of this money that he's borrowed. And then he pays none of it back. Not even the interest on these loans. And then he fudges the books so that, in a sense, he makes himself indispensable because he's the only one who can service the crown's debts. And, when money needs to be found, he's the one who can find it, even if it's not, even if what he's really doing is finding the crown's own money.
By the way, I just Googled Littlefinger embezzlement, and I would like you to know that I have no idea why you insist Littlefinger must be embezzling, but I think it stems from your basic misunderstanding of finance, which is a comment from a blog called Race for the Iron Throne.
Yeah.
So you have this thing Google orphaned.
Yeah.
I thought it was amusing that first thing that pops up is you're wrong. He's not embezzling. Littlefinger's
yeah, good. That's from a guy. You'll notice the name of the commenter is Lord Littlefinger's Lash. Which I didn't even click through, but yeah, this is a guy who is known on the message boards of the Game of Thrones fandom for some reason being a fanboy of one of the most sociopathic characters in the entire series, and it's quite frightening. Anyway, so, what I wanted to kind of get here is that, in terms of how modern geeks have modern political geeks have taken this show, it's entirely not clear, I've seen some conservatives argue that this is, Keynesian economics revealed, that, it just leads you in debt. I would argue it's actually a denunciation of vulture capitalism and the trickle-down economics. But the thing that I think this demonstrates about Littlefinger, that I think people sometimes, in terms of like his portrayal on the show, that fans have sometimes gotten wrong. He's not a subtle man. He is in fact a gambler. And you can see in this episode, from the very moment that he meets Ned Stark, he is being the most mustache-twirly villain you can think of. He's, mentioning the fact that, oh, your wife is so in love with me. And, he then, and this is where the bit with Catelyn gets involved, he then takes Eddard to the brothel and not so subtly suggests that, Eddard's wife is a whore. And then makes up this lie about the dagger. And this is what I want to get into, because it is one of the stranger things that he does in the series, and it's something of a dangling plot thread that kind of annoys me. He's making a statement of fact about, like, this dangerous conspiracy against, the hand of the king and his family that is easily disproved. I mean, when he first says to Catelyn, "That's my dagger. I lost it to Tyrion Lannister." Varys is in the room with him, and Varys knows that's not true. And when he repeats it again to Eddard Stark, if Eddard had asked anybody who was there, because, this is not the equivalent of, like, a backroom, bet between friends. Littlefinger did this in public, while sitting in the equivalent of, the skybox where the, 200 most important people in the country are. Had Eddard asked Renly, had he asked, Robert, anybody, he would have known that Littlefinger was lying to him about who tried to assassinate his son. So when people complain about Littlefinger, especially in Season 2, that he is he's way too obvious and he's not smart enough, Littlefinger is someone who, in the books, canonically, makes these crazy risks.
Well, he does, but are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't tell if we had frozen or not. He does make these kind of crazy risks, but I sense that, okay, there's a kind of, and we'll call them venture capitalists, who comes to believe their own hype, who has made a career out of making these kinds of unorthodox decisions, and has been proven correct, even though there's no evidence. I mean, there's a lot of machination. There's been a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. There's a lot of setup going into it, but in the end, it is going to still be, you got a 30% chance of winning. And if you keep on winning, you eventually become to believe that you are, in fact, a calm and steady managerial hand, as opposed to someone who has gotten lucky 3 out of 3 times. And there's the old adage that anyone can hit 300 in baseball.
Right.
All it takes is 3 squibs out of 10 pitches, and you're a 300 hitter. You just retire as a 300 hitter. I mean, you only got to get lucky 3 times. If those 3 times happen to be in a row, and I'll let the statisticians, because I hate remembering my statistics classes in undergrad, I'll let the statisticians kind of deal with how probable or improbable 3 times out of 10 would be, but it's not that unlikely. But the psychological effect of winning 3 times in a row, of consistently winning these gambles, is such that you begin to believe that you are above luck. And other people begin to believe it too. Mm-hmm. And at that point, it sort of ceases to be entirely a matter of luck, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the other thing I just add to that is that I think we have to understand that in a certain sense, a lot of what motivates Littlefinger is a massive superiority complex and a need to prove himself to be the smartest man in the room. Even when it's against his better interests. Like, if he really wants Eddard Stark to trust him, he probably should not be insulting him, like, every step of the way. But he can't stop himself. And there's a scene, I think in Season 3, where he's talking about getting Lysa Arryn to, like, join the Lannisters again. And in the books, he makes like a really crude dick joke about like, well, I've got the key to, to Lysa. And everyone in the room is just like, oh, this fucking asshole. And he can't stop himself. Like, even when it's producing exactly the effect he doesn't want, he can't stop himself from kind of trying to be the biggest man in the room.
I agree. The one thing that I will say in his, not defense, but in defense of his strategy, is that he is, by virtue of being sort of unlanded and known to have his allegiance for sale, he's able to sort of navigate these sorts of situations in a way where he can say something outrageous solely to gauge the reaction of others. I mean, when he says something like that, what he's looking for is who isn't offended. Because the person who's not offended is the person who has more invested in possibly working with him in the future than the person who is... So I don't want to sell Littlefinger short.
Yeah, I think what makes Littlefinger successful is ultimately it's not his subtlety. It's the fact that he has made himself indispensable, and that he's very good at working through cutouts in the old espionage sense of the term. That everyone doesn't trust him. Everyone sees him for who he is, but they have to work with him because none of them understand how finance works. He's like the one guy who understands accounting in a room full of noblemen who think that being interested in money makes you
lowborn.
Yeah, exactly. So the one thing that I also want to point to, because it goes to my master theory about Eddard Stark, is that at every step of the way that Littlefinger is advising Eddard Stark about his investigations, he's giving him terrible advice. And what the advice usually comes to is, do not use the power that you have. He says, for example, don't go to the king about this, right? Even though the whole rationale behind Eddard Stark being the Hand is that he is someone that the king trusts implicitly and would actually listen to. Later on, he will tell Ned, don't go talk to Sir Hugh, send this lackey instead, because that way, he won't be observed. Where, Littlefinger knows this guy. He knows that he's an arrogant asshole who's not going to talk to a nobody from the north. Whereas if Eddard Stark had, sent a royal warrant and said, you will come and talk to me, or, go to the dungeons, he absolutely would have told what he knew. So, one of the things that I've been arguing is that it's not necessarily honor so much that kills Ned Stark as his lack of understanding about his role as the head of a political institution. That in the South he is the Hand of the King, and that the Hand of the King means something other than Robert's buddy.
Well, and I think Ned understands that it means something other than Robert's buddy. I think he also understands that he's not well equipped for the job, and doesn't entirely understand what it is. I mean, to a certain extent, he thinks that the Hand of the King is, in some sort of more literal sense, sort of like the King's Guard. That his job is to protect Robert from foes who can be, thwacked at, not necessarily,
right,
intrigue. And I mean, we have to put a lot of blame on Robert for choosing a man who was totally unsuited for the work that...
Sure.
Right.
I mean, but the flip side is that, given that Eddard was much more competent and successful as Lord of the North, that if Eddard had been able to sort of stretch his mental muscles a bit and reason by analogy to say, what is my job? what does the handship entail? I think he could have been a lot more successful. I mean, for example, that opening bit where he complains that the tourney is too expensive, right?
Yeah.
As Hand, he could have had the authority to just say, cancel the tourney, I'll go tell the king that we can't afford it. But and then, see if Robert is actually going to push the point. And that's what a good hand kind of does, is like any subordinate of a powerful figure, you can do something and then get forgiveness instead of asking permission. And so, almost from second one, he doesn't quite get what power he has and doesn't have.
And he doesn't ever press the issue in a way that he should have known he could have, given their personal relationship. He should have. Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. I sort of, on a gut level, my reaction to your calumny against, Ned Stark.
It's not calumny. It's. I mean, given that the current, I wouldn't say consensus, but certainly the hegemonic interpretation is that Ned Stark is stupid. I think I'm making a case for Ned Stark actually being a lot more intelligent than people give him credit for. It's more that he's a fish out of water who just didn't understand political institutions. And that if he was in a context in which he understood the political office he held, that he would have done much, much better.
Yeah, I could see that. I guess how do I put this that makes it make sense? I guess the other part of it is that Ned Stark is, and we know this by now, he's the last of the line, right? No matter what else happens with his other children, he's going to be the last Stark, right? To rule Winterfell.
Well,
right. I mean, at least where we are with
where
everything
we are
else,
right now, yeah.
Right. Other people are trees or elsewhere, or but I sort of see it a little bit more in terms of like, and it's gonna sound sort of insane, but much like the Michael Mann version of Last of the Mohicans, the one where it's just about them, and we lose the whole frame narrative. It's simply about the last of these people and dying honorably in a beautiful place. And obviously Ned being sort of the father figure, and Arya being Daniel Day-Lewis. But there's this sort of idea that Ned chose his death, and even if he was either stupid or he was played, in the end, his decision was to go to the Wall. Right?
Okay.
When it all came down to it, his decision was to go to the Wall. And so in terms of talking about whether or not he was honorable, I think his last decision was indicative of a sort of a larger honor. Both, I'm going to the Wall, and also I'm going to join my son. So
Sure.
I can't get around that in terms of and I'm not quite as cognizant of the argument of Ned's just dumb. I don't think Ned's just dumb. Not that I think he isn't dumb, but he is more than dumb. He is also something. So again, and I'm just playing devil's advocate,
sure,
because your theory seems to already be a little too well worked out, and I'm an asshole. So
44 essays of working this out. I get very set in my opinions. Do we want to talk about the? How long have we been going, by the way?
We have been going for. We're fine.
Okay. Do we want to talk about the added scenes, the Cersei Joffrey scene and the Robert Barristan Jaime scenes? Because I think they're an interesting comparison in terms of like interpolated material. That these are
Okay.
scenes that, especially the Cersei Joffrey scene, must have happened because in the books, like Joffrey, after he's attacked, does like make up with Sansa in such a way that she thinks she still has a shot. And what I liked about this scene is that it's one of the moments where the like 100% proof Cersei from the books comes through. This like, you know, revisionist history, you know, Goebbels mentality, this, you know, paranoia about everyone who isn't a Lannister is our enemy, Joffrey as a tyrant, apart from the question of his sexuality. You know, it's really good, and it's, you know, especially as we head towards season 4, I worry about the mutual craziness of Cersei and Joffrey having been diluted to the point where certain character moments are going to be difficult to pull off.
I'm not following because I think if anything, they seem more together earlier on than they have lately. I mean,
no, that's what I meant. I meant that
okay.
This is an exception to the trend that we've seen in season 2.
Okay. So it's going to be a big break when all of a sudden the crazy comes out again.
Yeah, and you know,
I will say no for a couple reasons. One,
okay.
Saint Sebastian, Roz, that is all kinds of crazy. Littlefinger giving. Right,
you know, I didn't mean
Joffrey.
that Joffrey hasn't been crazy. It's more that Cersei hasn't been crazy, and she hasn't been as kind of rabidly defensive of Joffrey's crazy than Book Cersei has. Like, to Book Cersei, Joffrey can do no wrong.
Yeah. Whereas here, she's actually slightly critical of him, like at Tyrion's wedding.
Yeah.
She is sort of dismissive. I mean, there's one, when I was rewatching that episode a couple of weeks ago, there's actually this odd exchange between her and Tywin that almost makes it seem as if she's sort of asking her dad if Joffrey fell off a wall and happened to die, what would happen to the kingdom? And there's no actual dialogue to that extent. It's just after Joffrey gets up, decides to leave, she tries to stop him, and then we have this brief moment of eye contact between Cersei and Tywin where they're like, can we
deal with this?
Yeah. And I think Joffrey is the one who's going to instigate. Okay, maybe no. He's the one who's going to go a little crazy first.
Sure.
Yeah. Now I'm just saying, trying not to say anything.
Yeah.
Joffrey will do something. Something will happen. Cersei will respond in true crazy fashion. I guess is the best way to put that. But are we prepared for that, Cersei? And there's no way to say this without somehow spoiling it. So, hold on.
Should we just give them like a 5-second?
5, 4, 3. No, it's 3, 2, 1. Terrible counting. I think it'll be totally spoiler now. It'll be totally understandable why Cersei loses it after what happens to Joffrey at his wedding. That's a very old kind of tradition of, you know, if you think about the Irish tradition of keening, of what is the ritual. I mean, that's the ritual response to what happens.
I get that. It's more about, for example, after what happens to Joffrey, the way that Cersei then relates to Tommen, where, you know, she's pissed off at Tommen for not being Joffrey because, you know, even though Joffrey is, you know, headstrong, as she, you know, euphemistically puts it, she sees that in some ways as being a positive Lannister characteristic, that Joffrey was strong-willed, that, you know, he took what he wanted, and that's what makes you a good king. And I mean, maybe, you know, in her keening, she does a revisionist history of her son, that may be how they decide to do it.
I think that probably will be, because I mean Tommen is just going to come across as a sweet boy falling in love with a pretty girl, whereas Joffrey, and I guess this is the other thing, is that Joffrey is hardly, how do I put this? He's barely even been human for the majority of the show. He has been a sort of a sketch of sociopathy that,
right,
and as such can be relegated in the way that I think academics can very much sympathize with, to a failed project. 3 months of research that went nowhere, right? A grant that we got, we thought the results would be different, but that's what Joffrey seems like to me, whereas Tommen is a person in a way that Joffrey never was.
He can feel human emotions.
Yeah. And sorry, I have to talk over the, I don't know if you can hear that. Hopefully not.
Yeah, I can hear that.
Okay. We apologize. They are blowing grass around my apartment. Fuck you guys. I'm leaving. As for other things to cover in this episode, the only other thing that I wanted to sort of touch on, because I think it's so significant in the larger, I don't want to say scale, but in terms of who's being paralleled to who, and I sort of mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, but, Dany becoming the Khaleesi, Jon Snow becoming Lord Snow. These are moments of crowning. They have ascended to their respective thrones, and as we move forward, and as these two characters become leaders of men, and I think we could say that without spoiling anything, they become leaders.
Right.
There is a real difference between the man who had to work himself up from Lord Snow and the woman who self-declared herself to be Khaleesi.
Sure.
And that's going to be a really crucial part of next season, how they handle what's going to happen to Dany. Because up till now, Dany has been,
honorable.
She's in Rocky IV, right?
White savior mode, activated.
Right. I mean, she has the eye of the tiger, a dragon, whatever. I mean, she's sorry, she's in the Karate Kid. She even has her Mr. Miyagi. I mean, she is in this sort of
whereas Jon Snow has been working himself out of a hole, I think is the best way to put it. Like, it's interesting, both characters, ran into real trouble in Season 2, and then very much improved in Season 3. And I think Season 4 is going to be, hopefully what Season 3 was like for Dany, in terms of, he's actually going to have to step up and show what he's made of. Whereas I hope with Dany that they can start to pull in more of the ambiguity.
I think they have to. I mean, she's going to be, without spoiling anything, although those of you who've been spoiled have already long left us, without spoiling anything, she's going to be sitting on her ass for a couple of seasons.
I mean, it depends. It depends how they decide to telescope things, because they're going to have to.
Yeah.
And I think actually the marine sequence for Dany could be substantially improved if it's foreshortened a little bit. And I think if you advance the siege, because there's something more interesting about someone basically recapitulating American Reconstruction / Iraq 2003 when they're under attack from outside, as opposed to that, then they're attacked, then something else happens.
Whereas with Jon, he is going to become, and as we've been talking about how the only really important plot is what's coming from the north, Jon, as he becomes more and more empowered in the Night's Watch, as he he's going to advances as he does the decisions that he makes, and he is essentially going to take over Rob's roles from season 2 and 3 as a coalition builder, as someone, except the difference between them is Rob was unable to recognize the true threat, whereas Jon can. And I think Jon's ability...
to be fair to Rob, he was never actually informed about the true threat.
Well, yeah, he did the best with the misinformation he had, but Jon is informed. He knows what's coming, and that allows him to build a coalition that is different in kind from the one that Rob tried to build.
Sure.
And how quickly or slowly that endeavor is successful in the next season is going to kind of dictate where we're going for the next 2 or 3 seasons. I mean, if in the books it's almost as if, I mean, honestly, and it might just be the way that I read them in like 2 weeks over the summer, but it seemed as if once Jon Snow returns to the Night's Watch, it all just happens. It's just he's immediately elevated. There's some stuff with you-know-who.
I think it's more that when he gets back to the Wall, he's the man on the spot.
Yeah.
And it's the creation of a constituency by his actions when he's the man on the spot that carries through into everything else. And, let's not forget that Samwell Tarly proves to be one of the best, political fixers in Westeros.
Yeah.
And I really hope they keep that storyline. They've got to keep that storyline.
Well, since he was sort of the face of Game of Thrones at Comic-Con, I think he's going to be around. The one last thing I'll say, because it's sort of, for some reason we keep on using Star Wars analogies, but thank you, Joseph Campbell, but also fuck you, Joseph Campbell, you're wrong.
Death to Joseph Campbell.
But it seems to work. Jon returning to the Wall, it seems very much like that moment towards the end of A New Hope where they're showing the great plans for the Death Star. How will we defeat that? And Luke just walks up and he's like, oh yeah, I've shot Wombat smaller than that on, just sort of basically offhandedly, oh, yeah, and they're like, all right, you're in charge. And he's like, oh shit. Right? It's that sort of great moment where, no, I was just trying.
And I think the more interesting thing is that, for Jon Snow, it happens without his instigation. He doesn't go to pull a sword out of a stone. He doesn't, seek out Yoda. He just, it happens because, Samwell wants to make it happen, and it's better than the alternatives.
I will refute you a little bit on that, because there is very much a pulling of the sword on Jon Snow's part, and I'll just sorry, you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, Firefox is crashing.